On today's Locked On Texan podcast, John Crumpler of the Texan Wire joins the show, and we kick off today's episode looking at some very important YouTube comments.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily Houston Texans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers, to this Tuesday episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If this is your first time listening or watching the Locked On Texans podcast, thank you for stopping by. Be sure to subscribe, like, and comment to the Locked On Texans podcast on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Thank you to all of our returning listeners lending your ear as Cody and I continue to talk Texans here on this Tuesday episode. I'm your Texans football analyst, John, some sports guy Hickman. On the other side of the screen is your Texans beat reporter, credentialed media member, and Sports Illustrated's own Cody Davis. Today, we are joined by John Crumpler of the Texans Wire. We open up today's episode looking at the YouTube comments. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, America's sports book. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. As we pivot over to the YouTube comments, David P. 2017 said, I honestly think Pierce needs another year to learn the scheme and adjust. I feel like he wouldn't gotten the hang of it, but we'll never know. I say re-sign Singletary and sign someone just as good or better and have Pierce as 3, because he can sure get that 1 yard you need when it matters, being a power back. Cody, do you agree with that? That he needs another year and that he can for sure get you a 1 yard? Because we've seen Pierce not be able to get you 1 yard.
God dang, that was harsh. I'm not going to say
Pierce was hitting a lot in the backfield, by the way, so that's not an indication on necessarily his skill set. It's an indication on their comment. Pierce can't say he'll get you that 1 yard, because in those situations, in those short yardage situations, we've seen Pierce not be able to do that, but it wasn't all based off of what his ability was. A lot of times it was offensive line ability, and it hurt his success as well. Let me say that.
That makes a lot of sense. But what I would say is I'm all for giving Dameon Pierce another opportunity to prove that he can help this team. However, I would not say re-sign Devin Singletary, sake of this argument. I think he said get somebody else and have Dameon Pierce as your running back number 3. I wouldn't go that route, only because if they end up with Devin Singletary, that means that they missed out on 2 of the top 5 running backs in this free agency market. And even if you bring in somebody, matter of fact, put it like this, I would rather do this. Bring in somebody like Saquon Barkley, somebody that you know without a shadow of a doubt is one of those top-tier running backs on the market, and that's going to give Dameon Pierce an opportunity to be running back number 2 and still get that chance. Because, look, I think for him, another year in this scheme is going to be very beneficial for him.
Joe Lee, 3060. Barkley, Samuel, Schultz, Grenard. 4 must-sign players in free agency. Samuel is younger and cheaper and won't hinder the development of Tank and Nico, and is an instant upgrade from Robert Woods. Draft a rookie 3rd round as well. Receivers will be set. If not 3rd round receiver, take Theo Johnson to eventually replace Schultz. I'd take the DT from Illinois with our 1st round pick, if available, to solidify the front. Joe Lee, 3060. That is a great game plan.
No, he thought it back at everybody.
No pushback for me. I like that. I mean, you didn't necessarily address the cornerback position, and I think people are starting to underestimate how important it is to invest in that. But you said with your 1st pick, and you mentioned a 3rd pick, a mention of a 2nd round pick was never there. Kamari Lassiter out of Georgia may be available. Eric Rickeshaw out of Missouri may be available with their 2nd round pick, So you can still address it. Those are 2 very good corners, but I like that plan. No pushback.
I like it because he said exactly what B. Scott said. Just throw the bag at everybody. Just don't let nothing go untouched. Tap into everybody. I like it as well, John. And that also goes into something that we've been talking about. Build a lot of your foundational pieces on that rookie contract.
Absolutely. We got more John coming up, but it ain't me. It's John Crumpler, Texans Wire. Y'all don't go nowhere. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all of your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and go ahead and shoot your shot. FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA.
Welcome back in, ladies and gentlemen, to this Tuesday installment of Locked On Texans. And joining me, you guys already know, John Crumpler of USA Today Texans Wire. John, what's going on, man? And welcome back to Locked On Texans.
Hey, Cody, thanks for having me. I'm doing well. I'm excited to talk some draft.
Me too, man. First and foremost, today is the very first day of the NFL Combine, which means from here up until, free agency is probably going to die down a little bit. But from here all the way to the end of April, early May is going to be nonstop draft coverage here on Locked On Texans. And of course, I have one of the best football analysts with me today. John, I love your work, man. But let's jump right into it. I think we can all agree that when you take a look at the top 3 positions the Houston Texans should consider, I think we can all agree. You look at defensive tackle, corner, and wide receiver. As of now, depending on what is going to take place in a couple of weeks during free agency. But John, when you hear that, when you look at those 3 positions that I just laid out, what would you deem most important? And if you had an opportunity to do so, who would be the prospect that you would take?
Are we talking in the first round or?
In the first round, the most important position. And once you tell me who is your most important position, who should be the #1 prospect the Texans should be looking at?
So for me, I just can't stop thinking about how DeMeco Ryans ended his last press conference at the end of the season. And this is a guy, I think DeMeco has telegraphed previously what he's been thinking, whether that was in August before the season. He went on The Athletic. He said it's going to be a big year for Christian Harris and Derek Stingley. Or going back to when he took the job, I think he said there are 2 quarterbacks at the top of the board. And what was the last thing he said? He said, we have to improve on the front to give us a chance to win games.
Yep.
So for me, when I look at the Houston Texans, and you've got that anchor, that franchise pass rusher in Will Anderson. But if you can find that kind of guy at defensive tackle, that's when you can start to transform the trench to control the game. So for me, defensive tackle is that biggest need. And in the first round, I'm looking pretty closely at Byron Murphy II from the University of Texas. I think it's a guy that we have not seen his best ball yet. I think a lot of attention went to his teammate, Devondre Sweat. But he fits perfectly what DeMeco Ryans wants to do, is that explosive, strong, penetrating 3-technique defensive tackle. And I think if you put him there, that is a 3-down player who's not only going to change how Houston can play the run game, but also is going to help you get sacks on 3rd down.
Let's switch over to the opposite side of the line of scrimmage and take a look at wide receiver. Because it's like a lot of people, it's kind of like conflicting to see when, where, and how the Houston Texans should address that position. Because look, first and foremost, of course, we're talking about the draft, but the #1 thing is on everybody's mind. Can you go out and get one of the top wide receivers in free agency? Of course, at everybody's list, it's Mike Evans. But then at the same time, it's like, okay, due to the mergers of Nico Collins and Tank Dell, do you not go after somebody like Mike Evans and try to get one of the top wide receivers in the draft? Or do you just play smart, save your picks, and maybe let's say in the 3rd round, then you try to go out there and explore and try to add a wide receiver? Where do you stand on when and where and how the Houston Texans should go about addressing their wide receiving core during the draft?
Absolutely. And I think everyone would love to have Mike Evans, of course. He's a dynamic player. He played at Texas A&M. He's a future Hall of Famer. Who wouldn't want to throw that in the mix with C.J. Stroud? But unfortunately, we're talking about a salary cap league, and that's a guy who's going to demand $23, $24, $25 million per year. So when I look at this draft class, and this is considered one of the best receiver classes to come out in years, it is absolutely loaded from top to bottom. I can't help but look at that second round, look at pick 59 and say, man, there are 3 or 4 players you could get very, very excited about there. And you could make your offense look different depending on which guy you went with. I would target a receiver in the second round if I was Nick Caserio.
Wow. That's a good idea. I thought about that as well. However, me personally, sometimes I feel like it might be best if they targeted, let's say, in the third round. Just because there's one position that I'm also looking at that might be more important than wide receiver, and that's of course cornerback. Because as of now, we don't know what's going to happen with Steven Nelson. I'm under the belief that Steven Nelson days in Houston might be over, which means you're going to lose him in free agency, which means you're going to have to find a way to address that need. Just like wide receiver, you can go out and bring a veteran wide receiver, a veteran cornerback in. But for me personally, I would love to see the Houston Texans draft one of the top cornerbacks in this year's draft. And then that way you compare him alongside Derek Stingley Jr. Now you're looking at a situation where you would literally have arguably the best cornerback duo in the league. Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, of course, if you bring back Steven Nelson, this is a really easy equation, but you're right. It's a huge gap on the team. And if they don't bring back Steven Nelson, I would say it's like priority number 1 for the first round. I would agree with you.
More so than
defensive tackle, just because I think you can find those veteran bodies at least a reasonable cost. And I think everyone seems to have some suspicion if they're going to sink money into a big contract in free agency, it'll be on the line. But I don't know if that guy exists on the back end. So when you go to the first round, I think there's a chance everyone except for Terry and Arnold from Alabama could be available for the Texans. So if Quinion Mitchell makes it, I don't think he'll make it either. You run that to the podium, but there's another tier of guys like Kool-Aid McKinstry, like Nate Wiggins from Clemson. And I think the first round would be pretty reasonable to address corner if that need does make it all the way to the draft.
Last question before moving on to the next segment. John, I do want to ask you this, and it's just popped in my head because I'm kind of conflicted on when and how and where the Houston Texans should address the safety unit. I remember last time we had you on the show, we talked about how disappointing of a season Jalen Petrie had, but not only Jalen Petrie, it was Jimmy Ward. And when you take a look at the team on defense, the safety might have been one of, if not the most disappointing position group. Not just on one side of the ball, but overall.
The team.
In general, whether it's free agency, whether it's the draft, where do you feel could be the best case scenario for the Houston Texans to boost up their safety unit? Because I feel like they're in a tricky situation because if the season was to start tomorrow, they would have to probably run it back with Petrie and Jimmy Ward.
Yeah, I mean, going into this offseason, there's a legitimate argument the Houston Texans need not 1, but 2 new safeties, depending on whether or not that's a position you want to keep Jalen Petrie at. This is a position, though, that I kind of feel neutral about where to address it. I think there are plenty of value options in free agency or some higher end options like McKinney from the New York Giants if you wanted to chase that in free agency. But also, it is a good safety class. I think you could look late day 2 or even throw some darts on day 3 like the Texans have been known to do. And there are some prospects that you could bring into the fold with some good upside there. So I think they have a lot of different ways to play safety. And maybe this is one of those scenarios where they see what the market dictates, what the best value is going to be.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. It can be easy to ignore our social battery and spread ourselves thin, especially with social gatherings picking up after the wintertime. Everybody wants to see you. Everybody wants to see how you've been. What's the right amount of socializing for you? How do you recharge? Maybe you thrive around people, or maybe you need some more alone time. Therapy can give you that self-awareness to build a social life that doesn't drain your battery. If you're thinking of starting therapy, I think giving BetterHelp a try is a good way to go. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suitable to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Find your social sweet spot with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get started. You can get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, NFL.com/lockedon.
Welcome back in, ladies and gentlemen, to this Tuesday installment of Locked On Texans. And today, as mentioned before, is the start of the NFL Combine, which means that everybody, including myself, who is going to be in Indy, we're all going to be in draft mode. On yesterday's show, John and myself, we had a lot of fun doing our pre-combine mock draft. John, this is part of the reason why I wanted to get you back on, because I want to know, what is your mock draft looking like? We're not going to do all 7 rounds, but let's just stick to, let's say, the first 3 rounds, and I got something for you. Ready for this? This is my favorite part of doing mock drafts on this show.
That's perfect. Man, I love a good mock draft, and I'm excited to do a quick Thirst 2 days one here with you. And I've got a proposition for you. I got 2 names for each pick. And well, I'm gonna pitch. I'm just gonna give you both these names, and like I'm James Lipford, like I'm coming as a scouting guy, and you're gonna tell me who to pick, and we'll talk about the guy. Are you cool with that?
Okay, cool. I mean, honestly, this could be the perfect Nick Casario, D'Amico Ryans, type of party right here. If you're down with that. If he had a vest,
Man, if I'd thought about it, I could have done that. All right.
Sounds good. Let's get started.
So 23rd pick. So when we talked about this on another segment, we're looking at corner, we're looking at defensive line. And so make it to pick 23, 2 names I'm going to give you. Alabama cornerback, Kool-Aid McKinstry, or University of Texas defensive tackle, Byron Murphy II.
I'm going Byron Murphy II.
Okay, Byron Murphy. I mean, I think that's a really easy pick. We already talked about him, but he fits in so well with how this front wants to attack. And I think he'd bring a new dynamic to the team just in terms of how they can control the run game and some of the stunt combinations you could start to do with Will Anderson and potentially a big free agent addition.
Really quick, speaking of free agency addition, and it's one of the biggest topics that we've been talking about on this show, where do you stand with Jonathan Grenard as of right now?
I would like to have Jonathan Grenard back. I think everyone would like to have him back. It's going to be about his market, and is another team willing to pay him like he's their priority, sure thing, number 1 edge rusher, compared to, I think we'll be paying him as one of the premier players on our defense, but not the premier player on the defense, nor the premier player at his position. With Grenard, if I'm kind of watching the market, because if a guy like Brian Burns or Josh Allen over in Jacksonville, or maybe a defensive tackle like Christian Wilkins or Justin Madubuike, so either a position you don't have or a more talented player at that same position, if you can pay him, I think I'd rather make that big investment. But if the market works well with Grenard and those options aren't there, I think bringing him back would make a lot of sense. He had a great season.
The reason why I asked you that question, because, with us taking Murphy with our first pick, that means you will have a defensive line that will feature Murphy, Grenard, and Anderson. And I'm with you. I just always go back to the last time we heard Coach D'Amico Ryans, talk. Every time, and not just the last time, but throughout this whole entire year, ever since he became the coach, every time somebody asks him about what position do you think need the most improvement, regardless of how good the defensive line looked, he always talked about it's us with the guys up front. And, look, I think Kool-Aid might be my favorite draft prospect coming in, but realistically, knowing Coach D'Amico Ryans, how much he really wants to make this D-line arguably, if not the best in the league, man, I think that pairing of Murphy, Anderson, and Grenard probably would be, in a way, a dream scenario for Coach D'Amico Ryans. And once again, that's why I went with Murphy, because that's what Coach D'Amico Ryans want.
No, the team has told me what they want their identity to look like. And unless there's a $20 million investment on the defensive line or at defensive tackle specifically in free agency, I think defensive tackle is exactly where we should expect them to go. I think that's the pick the team would make as well.
Sounds good.
All right, so going into round 2, and I talked about this, I really think 59 is that sweet spot. I know you said the 3rd round, but I think the caliber of guy you get is just a little bit better at 59. So 2 names, and I actually talked about both these guys when we were on for to talk about the Senior Bowl, but they both make your offense look a little bit different. So we've got Michigan wide receiver Roman Wilson or Western Kentucky wide receiver Malachi Corley.
Let's go with Roman Wilson.
Okay. I like Roman Wilson as well, too. I think he's that explosive vertical player, someone who's going to come in. He can play that Z, he can play the slot. Really lets you continue to be interchangeable of Nico Collins and Tank Dell, but he does bring this added dimension of someone who can blow the top off the defense. I cannot wait to see how he runs this week at the NFL Combine. And in addition to that, he's got great hands. He runs good routes. He's reliable and adds a new skill set. You saw it when he caught 12 touchdowns this year on way to Michigan winning the national championship. I think he'd be a great pick.
And along those same lines, since we're, doing a mock draft and analyzing what the Houston Texans have as of right now, John, I want to get your thoughts on how much faith do you have? And it's something me and John talked about one day last week, but how much faith do you have in John Mechie getting back to the player we thought we was getting, before the ACL injury, and of course, the cancer battle that he had to go through? Because I know a lot of people might be down on John as of right now, but the one thing that a lot of people got to keep in mind is the fact that that young man was away from football for almost 2 years. And last year was like a year of him literally, just getting the feel of things, getting back into football shape, getting back into, game shape and all that other good stuff. Do you see a situation, or how much faith do you have that John Mechie can be that player that we thought we was getting?
And I understand why people are reasonably down on John Mechie right now. There were times when he just did not look like a starting NFL wide receiver when he was on the field this past season. But at the same time, I agree with you. He was away for football for so long. That was a rookie year, and I would say a deconditioned rookie year. So what's he going to look like when he gets 9 more months to get back into shape, work out with his NFL teammates and against NFL defenders, and refine some of those things that you don't get to do when you're rehabilitating from really from just how weak you're going to be after beating cancer? An incredible accomplishment from Mechie. So I'd say, am I confident that he can do it? I think he can. I really can. But if I'm the Houston Texan, I'm probably not banking that he can get it done. I think that you should expect him to be on your team, expect him to be a very valuable contributor. But if he doesn't, I think you do have to have another third receiver option, because you need that just to take this offense to the next level. And as we saw down the stretch last year, if Nico or Tank go down, and Nico does have an injury history, Tank's on the smaller side, that's always going to be a risk. You want another option so that you've got 2 top level guys. So for me, if Mechie hits his ceiling and you take a guy like Roman Wilson in the second round, guess what? You've got 4 great wide receivers that are all on rookie deals. The league's going to be in a lot of trouble. But I don't think that the Texans necessarily want to put themselves in a spot where it's John Mechie or bust for their 2024 wide receiver room.
That makes a lot of sense.
Now for the third selection, so we took Byron Murphy. I'll ask you, do you want a safety prospect or a corner as the second one?
What are the options? What are we looking at?
Well, I've got 3 names. We didn't pick a corner in the first one. So I'll give you Jeremiah Trotter, linebacker from Clemson, Jarvis Brownlee from Louisville, he's a cornerback, or Javon Bullard. He's a free safety from the University of Georgia.
We got to go Jarvis. Jarvis. Knowing that there's a real possibility Steven Nelson is going to be gone.
Yeah. And I think Jarvis would be, if they do lose Steven Nelson, this would be the perfect time to take a chance on a guy like Jarvis Brownlee, who had a very productive career, 5'11", 180. He had 12 passes defended in 2022, just 6 passes defended this last year, but super productive player while he was at Louisville. I got to talk to him while I was at the Senior Bowl. Really fun guy. He's got that dog. I think that it's playing cornerbacks a lot like playing tennis. You kind of you have to be you got to have a mental edge because you're out there by yourself and you need to go out and win. I think he's the kind of guy that has the traits. He was running routes for people at the Senior Bowl. And when you put someone across from Stingley, especially if they want to continue to let Stingley shadow like this, I do think it's a favorable position to let a guy develop. So I think Brownlee could be an excellent addition to the secondary.
Sounds good. John, really quick before moving on, the one position we haven't talked about is running back. Now, I understand everybody is hoping and praying that Saquon Barkley comes, but in an event that the Texans and Barkley can't get a deal done, what would you think would be best case scenario for the Texans? Do you think it would be re-upping with Devin Singletary another year, maybe 1 or 2 years? And would you think it would be in their best interest to draft a running back? Because I look at it from a standpoint, if they do not have an opportunity to add Saquon Barkley and Jacob as well from the Raiders, I look at it from a standpoint, maybe, just maybe, within the third or fourth round, it might be in your best interest to draft a running back. But of course, if you get Saquon or Jacobs, then of course,
Of
you
course,
don't have to worry
that was
about
going to
it.
be my answer. I was going to say Barkley here, and then right one notch beneath Josh Jacobs, you call his agent as well. But yeah, if you don't want to spend that kind of money on a running back, or let's say the Texans just get outbid for both those guys, I think it's very reasonable you start with bringing back Devin Singletary. And I was talking to John about this week. Devin Singletary probably has an 1,100 yard or 1,200 yard season if he's the full-time starter. If they know from the on-go, hey, the Dameon Pierce zone running experiment's not going to work this season. And that probably would change how we feel about Devin Singletary if he's coming off an 1,100 yard campaign. And let's be honest, fantasy football owners would have voted him to the Pro Bowl. But that's not the reality we live in. But I think you can treat his talent as such. So you re-sign Devin Singletary. I would explore adding a secondary option in free agency as well. Maybe you look at a DeAndre Swift, add in Antonio Gibson, someone who's going to come in at a mid-level contract, and you could kind of mix and match those two while praying that Dameon Pierce is productive. But I would also have no problem if they want to take a running back in the third or fourth round. It's not a great class. I'm not sure that there's any of the top 50 players that in this class are a running back. Maybe one goes earlier because someone needs it, but there are plenty of names. We'll see how far Jonathan Brooks, plenty of Texans fans watched him at Texas this year, and he's injured, so he could fall down the board. But I also like other names. I like Braylon Allen from Wisconsin. I think Trey Benson from Florida State could be productive. That would be a totally viable strategy, and the sky won't be falling if they don't land Saquon Barkley. As much hype as he might have right now, and as many people checking who he's following on Instagram.
Also sounds good. John Crumpler from USA Today Texans Wire. John, really quick, where can our listeners follow you at on all your social media platforms?
Absolutely. Cody, thank you for having me on. Guys, you can follow me on Twitter at John H. Crumpler. I'm on Instagram, trying to get back to doing that, at TexansDoc. And finally, you can read all my work on TexansWire.usatoday.com.
Sounds good. And as always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at CodyDavis_24. Once again, that's Cody, COTYDAVIS_24. And please be sure to check out my co-host, John Hickman, over on all of his social media platforms at John_Hickman12. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.